What if the trash you throw away could become the most beautiful part of your garden? Today on Verdant Dreams, we're diving into DIY garden ideas that transform everyday waste, bottles, old jars, broken things, into something magical. This isn't just about saving money. It's about creating beauty from what the world ignores. You'll find timestamps below. Jump to any idea that fits your space. And if you have a question, the comments are always open. If this video inspires you, take it, make it yours. Work with what you have. Build something real. Maybe to you, I'm just another voice on the internet. But behind this screen is a small family with a big dream. Every view, every like, every share, it's not just numbers. It's a lifeline. It's love. It's hope. Thank you for being here. Thank you for seeing us. In the quiet breeze of an early autumn afternoon, the sun kisses the tops of tiny plastic gems that shimmer like magic atop a modest garden fence. From what once were discarded plastic bottles, now rise the crown jewels of a tiny front yard in a sleepy English suburb. Every fence post becomes a pedestal, and every gemstone, crafted by hand and soul, tells a story of transformation. Painted in bold hues of emerald, sapphire, and amethyst, these upcycled toppers catch the light in the most delightful ways. As the wind stirs the nearby chrysanthemums and asters, the colorful bottle caps twinkle, mirroring the sparkle of dew-kissed petals. The fence no longer stands just as a boundary, but as a beacon of creativity, a conversation piece for every passerby. Neighbors stop. Children point. Guests smile. And the garden, once bare and small, now sings in full color. It's not the size of the yard that matters, but the heart poured into its details. And what better place to show that heart than on the garden's very edge? Tiny yards deserve grandeur too, not through expensive decorations, but through imagination. These faux gemstones breathe life into trash, turning something forgotten into something treasured. Placed alongside blooming marigolds and trailing Japanese anemones, the fence becomes a painter's palette, a guardian of nature's symphony. This is more than a DIY project, it's a celebration. A celebration of second chances, of color in small places, of beauty found in the unexpected. And as the sun sets, casting golden warmth over the garden's edge, the little bottle gems glow softly, whispering to every eye that sees them, even the smallest things can shine. There it stands, not attached to walls, not bound by a frame, an old door with no house behind it, opening to a world made of color, bloom, and breath. Its hinges creak not with wear, but with whispers of stories past. In this tiny backyard haven, the rustic door becomes more than salvage, it becomes soul. Once forgotten in a farmhouse barn, its surface weathered by time and tales, the door now claims a new life amid lavender breezes and marigold laughter. Brushed in gentle tones of sage, white, or faded blue, each color is a choice to renew. Climbing clematis kisses its arch, while sedum bursts at its feet like a soft welcome mat. It doesn't swing or lock. It doesn't guard. It invites. Step through this door, and you're not simply walking into a garden, you're entering a memory you haven't made yet. Children run through it as if it leads to wonderlands. Adults pause to feel something tender. It frames more than flowers, it frames the moment. In a world where gardens often imitate design, this one remembers feeling. A garden doesn't need vast acres, only pieces of your past, painted and planted with care. An old door becomes a centerpiece, anchoring every bloom and story. This doorway leads nowhere, and yet everywhere. It makes a tiny yard feel like a realm. It makes the mundane magical. With every vine that climbs its spine, with every flower that leans against its legs, the door finds its second breath. It is no longer forgotten. It is cherished. They were once gray, unnoticed, smooth stones gathered from the riverbed or leftover from landscaping piles. But in this tiny garden, they've become something magical, a carpet for the earth, a border of joy, a mosaic of memory. With each brushstroke of paint, the stones have transformed into tiny bursts of happiness, and now they guide the eyes, the steps, and the hearts of every guest who walks by. The path is not long. It doesn't lead to grandeur, but it glows in its intention, to bring color where it's least expected. Soft corals, spring greens, deep blues, and sunny yellows line the beds like a painter's palette split open across the grass. The flowers behind them, blooming marigolds and asters, bow gently in agreement, forming a harmony of bloom and stone. There is something deeply human about decorating the edges. It's where detail often hides, where care becomes visible. This stone edging isn't loud, it's inviting. It doesn't need perfection. Its charm comes from the hand that held the brush, the vision that imagined joy even in tiny places. And so, the garden comes alive not just with plants, but with pieces of the soul. A stone, once dull, now tells a story of revival. A border, once overlooked, now defines the garden's rhythm. These aren't just edges, they are frames of a living painting, constantly shifting with each season's palette. Children follow the colors with their fingers. Gardeners kneel beside them with pride. Visitors smile, realizing that beauty isn't about budget, it's about boldness, intention, and a little bit of whimsy. The painted stones become like confetti underfoot, a celebration that never ends. Because sometimes, all a garden needs to feel new, is a pop of color along the path. Once used to carry water, now it pours color. A humble kendi, once chipped, forgotten, or cracked by time, finds a second life among the blossoms. In this backyard sanctuary, it no longer needs to hold water to become a fountain. It becomes something softer, more poetic, a fountain of flowers, spilling color like a dream that never dries. Placed gently on the garden floor, its open mouth tilted forward, the kendi seems to breathe. Out of its clay body flows a cascade of marigolds, chrysanthemums, and sedum, blooming as if they were once water, now transformed by the earth's magic. Moss gathers around the base, soft and green, like nature's cushion to cradle its beauty. The kendi is no longer just an object, it becomes a bridge between past and present. It reminds us of function turned into art, of broken things turned into centerpieces. It makes the garden feel alive with imagination, as though it speaks to anyone passing by, nothing is ever too broken to bloom again. In a small space, this kind of creativity breathes life. You don't need a grand fountain. Just a jar, a tilt, and a vision. The kendi's curves now echo the lines of nature, imperfect, beautiful, embracing the soil like it always belonged. And in the quiet hum of fall, the blooms keep spilling out, not because of water, but because of love. Here in the corner of a tiny yard, the fountain doesn't gurgle. It glows. The flowers overflow, inviting bees, butterflies, and daydreams to gather around. Children believe it's magic. Gardeners know it's care. And everyone agrees, it is the heart of the garden. Because in the right hands, even a broken jug can pour beauty for a lifetime. It starts with a glint, a tiny flash of blue, a shimmer of rose, a spark of green. Hanging softly from the beams of a handmade pergola, the bottle shade drape dances with the wind and the sun. Each strand sways like a whisper, catching light and scattering it in every direction. It is not just shade, it is celebration. These were once forgotten bottles. Clear, cloudy, unloved. But with vision and color, they've become stained glass dreams suspended in air. Each bottom cut, sanded smooth, painted in pastel joy, then linked together to form a cascade of upcycled wonder. The pergola becomes a stage, and the sunlight its spotlight. Underneath, time slows. A white bench invites pause. Around it, chrysanthemums and sedum autumn joy stretch their petals toward the filtered sun. Anemones wave beside the drape like they're applauding the show. The soft flickering of color makes shadows dance on the ground, like watercolor flickers across canvas. This is a retreat, a moment, a mood. In small spaces where big structures don't fit, this tiny pergola and its bottle curtain create a sanctuary. A place to sit with a warm drink. A place where thoughts soften and dreams grow tall. It costs almost nothing, but gives back endlessly. Because beauty isn't always found in perfection, it's found in the reuse, in the reinvention, in turning trash into tender magic. The bottles are no longer waste. They are windows into another way of seeing the world, playful, resourceful, gentle. The neighbors call it charming. The children call it magical. The gardener knows, it is simply love, turned into light. It used to be junk, bent forks, cracked tin trays, rusting rods, and broken wire baskets. Forgotten pieces that had lost their place in kitchens, sheds, and garages. But today, along the edges of a small garden fence, they bloom. Not with petals, but with purpose. The flower crown fence is not a typical structure. It wears its colors proudly, sunburst yellows, ocean blues, coral pinks, each petal cut and shaped from discarded metal. Together, these salvaged scraps form crowns of joy, dancing across the top of every fence panel like wildflowers caught in the wind. In the light of afternoon, these metal flowers glimmer. Around them, real blooms gather. Chrysanthemums nod gently beside them, while marigolds glow beneath. The contrast between natural and handmade isn't jarring, it's harmonious. One rooted, the other reborn. One soft, the other strong. Tiny yards often hide their walls. But this fence asks to be seen. It tells the story of rebirth, of care, of imagination that refuses to let beauty fade into landfills. Every flower crown started as waste, but now stands like royalty over the garden's edge. There is artistry in this chaos. A fork becomes a petal. A gear becomes a daisy's heart. Spray paint becomes sunshine. And every curve and coil says something quietly profound, even what's broken can bloom again. Visitors stop and stare. Children point. Gardeners beam with pride. The junk fence is not just functional, it is emotional. It turns the border into a stage, the trash into treasure, and a regular garden into a place where creativity lives, loud and proud. In every bloom of this metallic crown, there's a reminder, nature isn't the only thing that can grow, so can ideas. So can hope. And so can fences. In the stillness of a small garden, a cluster of bamboo poles rises like a quiet forest choir. But look closer, they're not just poles. They wear faces. They wear stories. They wear joy. These backyard bottle totems are born of two humble things, bamboo and discarded plastic bottles. And yet, together, they become art, tall, smiling guardians that breathe personality into every patch of soil. The bamboo stands strong and earthy. The bottles? They dance in color. Teal, magenta, sunflower yellow, each ring painted with care, each detail shaped by imagination. Some bottles are cut into patterns. Some become faces, complete with eyes and cheerful grins. Others are abstract, stacked like ancient symbols, mysterious and playful at once. They're not just decoration. They're conversation starters. They're storytellers. And they live here, among the blooms. Around them, chrysanthemums sway. Marigolds peek up in curiosity. Sedum spreads like velvet across the earth. Together, they welcome you into a garden not just of flowers, but of personality. The beauty of the totem is in its boldness. It stands where nothing once stood. It says, "I matter," even though it was once trash. It says, "I am art," even without symmetry. And it brings vertical life into a horizontal garden. Tiny yards often run out of room. But a bamboo totem rises, filling airspace with energy. It catches the sun. It casts playful shadows. It becomes a vertical burst of character in a world of petals and leaves. You don't need a sculptor's skill. Just bamboo, bottles, and belief in beauty. And maybe a little laughter, because these totems often look back at you with wide eyes and crooked smiles, like garden spirits with stories to share. They guard not just your plants, but your playfulness. They remind us that gardens aren't only about growth, they're also about expression. They don't need water. They don't need pruning. Yet they bloom in full pastel splendor all season long, like sugar-dusted mounds scattered across a storybook garden. These are not your usual bushes. These are bottle bushes, carefully crafted, soft-hued, and bursting with charm. Made from everyday plastic bottles, their transformation is nothing short of delightful. Each bottle is trimmed, curled, and painted in colors gentle enough to soothe the soul: blush pinks, robin's egg blues, buttercream yellows. Layer by layer, they're assembled into round, bush-like forms that mimic nature without trying to replace it. Nestled between real flowers like chrysanthemums and asters, the bottle bushes look at home. They don't scream for attention. They whisper playfully, inviting guests to lean closer, to guess what they're made of. And when the light hits just right, they glow like soft glass sculptures under the sun. In a small front yard where space is precious, these bottle bushes fill the gaps with cheer. They add shape, rhythm, and color, especially when the real blooms rest between seasons. Their curves echo the roundness of marigold heads, the tight clusters of sedum, the swaying grace of Japanese anemones. But beyond their beauty, they carry a message: that joy can come from the most unexpected things. What was once trash is now treasure, not just reused, but reimagined. There is art in their imperfection, sweetness in their simplicity. Children run their hands across the smooth petals. Neighbors pause and smile. Gardeners beam with quiet pride. These bushes don't pretend to be real. They become part of the dream, a dream where sustainability meets storybook charm. In a world chasing grand gestures, sometimes it's the tiniest touches, a rounded bush made of bottles, painted with love, that make a garden unforgettable. The sea doesn't have to be nearby to leave its mark. In this tiny garden by the fence, the waves roll not with water, but with color. The edges of the flower beds mimic the shoreline, a place where shells meet sand, where stones remember salt, where a touch of the coast finds home in a backyard. Seascape shell stone borders are more than decoration. They're memory. Each shell once held the hush of ocean breath. Each stone, rounded by tide and time, now painted in hues of sea glass and morning skies. Together, they form a poetic border, a soft boundary between soil and soul. The garden above blooms gently. Japanese anemones sway like underwater dancers. Sedum autumn joy grounds the edge with its coral tone. Marigolds dot the space like drops of golden sun. Yet, it's the border, with its curves and seashell sparkle, that tells the story. This isn't a tropical escape. It's a coastal whisper tucked into a suburban front yard. With shells gathered from trips, painted stones from leftover projects, and just a touch of driftwood, it becomes a world apart. A sanctuary where the breeze feels saltier, where every edge reminds you of walking barefoot near the tide. Children crouch to pick their favorite shell. Guests run their hands along the stones. And the gardener smiles, knowing this border was made with more than materials. It was made with longing, with creativity, with calm. Tiny gardens don't need palm trees or crashing waves. Sometimes, just a soft curve of seashells along a flower bed is enough to transport. To remind us that we carry beauty with us, even far from shore. Because when the sea meets the garden, even the smallest spaces begin to breathe deeper. Sometimes, all it takes is a wall, a simple vertical canvas, to turn a garden from ordinary to enchanting. And in this corner of a small backyard, the old candy jars rise again. Not standing on the ground as they once did, but floating, weightless in their beauty, blooming with new life. Once used to carry water, the candy now carries color. Mounted on wooden panels or bamboo walls, each jar leans slightly forward, letting its blossoms cascade like a gentle floral waterfall. Marigolds burst out in golden joy. Sedum drapes in soft blush. Anemones trail like poetry. The jars, painted in earthy gradients, add warmth, a rustic glow that welcomes every glance. In small gardens, where space is precious, the vertical becomes vital. This floating candy wall brings texture and elevation without taking any ground. It adds a rhythm of repetition, jar, bloom, a visual symphony climbing the fence line. Beneath it, a quiet bench awaits. Around it, herbs and petals lean in. What was once trash, cracked, chipped, discarded, is now centerpiece. And each imperfection in the candy tells a story. A hairline crack becomes a memory. A faded glaze becomes a canvas. In lifting them up, the gardener has done more than save material, they've saved meaning. Neighbors call it clever. Visitors call it beautiful. But the gardener knows it's something else entirely, a rescue, a reinvention, a reverence. For culture. For waste. For art. For growth. The floating candy wall is proof that beauty doesn't need space, it needs soul. That the vertical can bloom just as boldly as the soil. And that every object, no matter how broken, can find a higher purpose, if only we dare to lift it.